It is Tuesday, May 19th, 2026, and this is The High Road, Logistics and Leadership. I'm Dan Miller, and I view every freight lane as a high-stakes chess game.
I'm Jules Sterling.
This is Elena Rossi.
And I'm Buck Reynolds. We have a great show for you today.
Look, we have a packed board today, folks. Yesterday, we were digging into the fallout from the CVSA road check and that massive rural retail tech battle between Amazon and Walmart. But honestly, that was just the warm-up. Today, the House basically dropped a 1,000-page playbook on our desks, the Build America 250 Act. Bottom line, the federal government is finally trying to write the rules for the robots, right?
Actually, Dan, it's a 5-year, $580 billion framework. It's not just about robots. Though Subtitle E, the safe integration of autonomous commercial motor vehicles, is certainly the tectonic shift we've been waiting for.
Well, it's about time we got some clarity, right? We've been living in this patchwork of state laws for way too long. It makes managing national accounts feel like I'm constantly translating between 5 different languages.
Here's the deal, Jules. Clarity from the government usually comes with a massive bill and a bunch of bureaucrats who couldn't back a trailer into a barn. $580 billion? That's a lot of taxpayer cash.
It's a lot of capital on the field, Buck. But before we get into the infrastructure weeds, I want to talk about the real mover, this regulatory scaffolding for autonomous trucks. They're giving the DOT a 2-year homework assignment to write the performance standards. No more testing exemptions is the only path.
Which is crucial for risk management. They're requiring a safety case, which means manufacturers have to prove an equivalent level of safety to a human. Hardware, software, cybersecurity. It's about time.
And it includes federal preemption. That's huge for the carriers I work with. One set of rules for the whole interstate system. You know, sort of like a universal remote for the highway.
Federal preemption sounds good until the federal standard is lower than what we need on the road. And they're talking about new electric vehicle registration fees to pay for it? A user pays model? That's just a new tax on the tech they're forcing us to buy.
Actually, Buck, the infrastructure is crumbling. We saw yesterday that $3 billion for bridges is a drop in the bucket. This bill allocates $50 billion specifically for bridges. That's a structural necessity, not just a political talking point.
Look, whether you love the tax or hate the tech, the play's being called. The industry's moving toward a national rule book, right? And speaking of big moves, Jules, you were looking at Amazon basically trying to become the AWS of the actual physical world?
Oh, I am obsessed with this. Amazon Supply Chain Services, or ASCS, is officially open for business. They are decoupling their logistics network from the retail side, meaning you don't even have to sell on Amazon to use their trucks, their planes, or their warehouses.
Whew, that's a massive expansion of a playing field.
It's sort of like, okay. Remember when AWS was just an internal tool for Amazon's website, and then they opened it up and it basically became the internet? That's what they're doing with freight. They have 80,000 trailers, 100 aircraft, and 200 fulfillment centers.
So now we're all just going to be subcontractors for Daddy Bezos? I mean, what does this do to the independent guys?
My thing is the liability gap, Jules. Yesterday, we talked about Amazon using agentic AI for rural delivery with non-CDL drivers. If they open this network to anyone, who is carrying the indemnity? If a 3M shipment on an Amazon-hired gig driver causes a wreck, who is the Iron Lady going to go after?
Well, Amazon claims they're giving small businesses access to the same cost, efficiency, and speed they built for themselves. Early adopters are already in. Procter & Gamble, Land's End. It's about reliability and transparency.
It's about scale, Jules. They're trying to turn logistics into a utility, like turning on a faucet, right? But you know what isn't a utility? the spot market. Speaking of which, now it's time for Spot Rate Tape, our Tuesday segment where we look at the national benchmarks and see who's winning the ground game.
Yeah.
Look, it's Tuesday, May 19th, and we are coming off a massive post-road check hangover. If you're a VP of supply chain looking at your transportation spend this morning, here is the reality on the tape. Dry van national average just took a punch, jumping to $2.65 per mile all in.
Wow.
That is a 24-cent week-over-week spike, Buck. That's the largest single-week move we've seen since the ELD mandate back in 2017. Right? Carriers were sitting out the inspection blitz, capacity stayed home, and the shippers who had to move freight got absolutely mauled.
I saw those rejection rates ticking up on my end. My retail clients were, let's just say they weren't happy.
Reefer is holding firm at $3.12. We're seeing a massive geographic shift, though. South Texas is officially taking the wheel from Florida. The Laredo to Los Angeles corridor, reefer rates there exploded by 59% in the last 10 days because of the produce push.
Is that being driven by the Mexican cross-border volume?
I mean, it's about time the guys with the open decks got paid. We've been in the cellar for 2 years.
Well, the cellar door is open, Buck. My outlook? Expect this volatility to stay high through June. We're still digesting the out-of-service numbers from RoadCheck. Capacity is tighter than it looks. If you haven't locked in your Mexican border capacity, you're already behind the 2-minute warning. That's the spot rate tape for this week.
Wait, Dan, you didn't mention the Salinas to Chicago lane?
I was getting there. $3.06 per mile, up 8 cents in 4 days. If you've got berries moving out of the valley, prepare for a bloodbath. Spot rate tape, that's a wrap.
Before we dive into the next story, I want to take a second to acknowledge the folks who make this show possible. Strategic logistics requires world-class engineering, and this show is powered by the stack developed by Eric Christensen at Neural Network Media. He's the architect behind the code that keeps our data sharp and our voices reaching you every day. Support the person behind the platform. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/neuralnetworkmedia for a free trial and access to our daily briefing PDF. It's got all the charts Dan was just ranting about.
Ranting? I call it passionate analysis, Jules.
It's certainly loud, Dan. But if we want to talk about quiet power, we need to talk about what's happening in Marysville, Ohio.
Here we go. The trucks without a cab.
Actually, yes. Einride and Ease Logistics just deployed Level 4 autonomous electric trucks into actual daily freight operations. This isn't a pilot in purgatory anymore. They are running between warehouses on local public roads with no driver on board.
No driver on board? But a guy in a fancy office in Sweden is watching on a monitor? That's not a truck, Elena. That's a remote control car with a 40,000-pound trailer. What happens when the 5G drops out in a cornfield?
They have remote operators, yes, but the ADS, the Automated Driving System, is handling the dynamic driving task. They navigate private property and public roads. The reason this matters is that it's part of the Drive Ohio Truck Automation Corridor. It's the state and federal government finally putting their money where their mouth is.
And it's electric, right? That's sort of a double whammy for the green initiatives my shippers are pushing.
Look, it's a niche play right now, but it's a first and goal situation. If they can prove this works in the Marysville corridor, they're going to try to scale this to the AWS of logistics we were talking about earlier. But, Buck, you're right to worry about the tech. We saw Volvo just take a massive hit on the old school side of things.
$197 million, to be exact. Volvo Group North America settled with the California Air Resources Board, CARB, over emissions violations from 2010 through 2016.
See, even the big guys can't get the hardware right. What was it? Defeat devices?
They called them auxiliary emission control devices that weren't properly disclosed. 10,000 engines. Volvo's taking a $196 million hit to their Q2 operating income. $12 million in civil penalties, $71 million to an air pollution fund, and over $100 million for mitigation projects.
That's a lot of money that could have gone into, research and development? It sends a message, doesn't it?
It signals a zero-tolerance era. Complacency is the precursor to catastrophe, and CARB is making an example of them. If you're a carrier, you have to realize that the regulatory environment isn't just a suggestion anymore. It's a liability minefield.
Not in a vacuum. That's a heavy hit. But the economic data shows the industry might actually have the stomach for it right now. The Cass Freight Index just showed a third consecutive month of sequential volume growth.
Oh, that's great news. Are we finally seeing the great rate recovery Dan is always talking about?
We're getting close, Jules. Line haul rates surged in April. We are seeing manufacturing indexes recover. The supply side purge we've been watching for 2 years, it's finally hitting the wall. We're moving from a buyer's market back to the chess game where carriers have some pieces on the board again, right?
Tell that to the guys in Nebraska. They're getting priced out of the game by the railroads.
The UP versus BNSF fight? That is a nasty bit of business.
It's a mess. Union Pacific just filed a 129-page complaint against BNSF. They're accusing BNSF of using reciprocal switching to hike rates on grain shippers by over 400%. Well, here's the deal. Reciprocal switching lets a shipper reach a second railroad for a fixed fee. BNSF allegedly took a $105 per car rate and swapped it for a merchandise rate of almost $1,400 in some spots, like Grand Island, Nebraska.
That's not a rate hike. That's a blockade.
It's a defensive move, Dan. BNSF is protecting their Western Corn Belt territory because they're terrified of the UP Norfolk Southern merger. They're trying to starve the competition before the merger even gets through the Surface Transportation Board.
But isn't that just hurting the shippers? I mean, the farmers in Nebraska don't care about a mega merger. They care about getting their corn to market without losing their shirts.
Precisely. And the STB is going to have a field day with this. It's anti-competitive on its face. But BNSF will argue they're just adjusting to market conditions. It's exactly why we need more transparency in the rail sector.
Look, it's a zero-sum game in rail right now. They're fighting over the last few yards of territory, right? But speaking of territories, we've got to talk about the security situation. Elena, you saw the report from Overhaul. Cargo theft is, it's changing.
It's evolving from smash to scam. Overall volume is down slightly, but deceptive pickup fraud surged 31% year over year.
Deceptive pickup? That's where they steal the carrier's identity, right?
Exactly. A padlock on a trailer doesn't matter if the guy who picks up the load has forged credentials and a stolen identity. They're targeting port-adjacent warehouses in New Jersey. Incidents there jumped 119%.
I keep telling these fleet managers, you can't just trust a PDF and an email. You gotta know your drivers. But everyone is so obsessed with automation, they forget the human factor.
It's not just knowing your driver, Buck. It's sophisticated criminal networks. Electronics are still the top target, but auto parts thefts are up 142%. They are targeting specific components in the supply chain.
Why auto parts?
Because they're high value, easy to flip, and difficult to track once they're broken down. It's strategic theft. They aren't just grabbing a trailer and hoping there's TVs inside. They know exactly what's on the manifest before the truck even arrives.
All right, let's look at the big board for the day. This is our main story, and it's a weird one, folks. We're seeing a massive pivot in how global trade and national defense are starting to overlap.
You're talking about the Ford military makeover, right?
Exactly. Ford is in advanced talks to start repurposing the F-Series and the Ranger, their commercial powerhouses, for military logistics. They're moving away from these multi-million-dollar purpose-built tanks and towards commercial off-the-shelf or COTS solutions.
So Uncle Sam wants to trade in the Humvee for an F-150? I mean, I love a Ford, but is it ready for a combat zone?
It's not about the front lines, Buck. It's about the logistics tail. It's about having a vehicle you can fix with parts from any local dealership instead of waiting 6 months for a custom gear from a defense contractor. It's a massive play for agile logistics.
And it ties into the broader trade news, too. That new U.S.-China Board of Trade that was just announced after the summit in Beijing?
That's the Managed Trade Framework. They're trying to stabilize the system through 2028. China just committed to buying $17 billion in U.S. agricultural products every year.
$17 billion! Plus the 25 million metric tons of soybeans they promised last year. Look, this is a huge win for the ag hauling sector. If you've got grain trailers, you're looking at a steady flow of work for the next 4 years.
If the Board of Trade actually holds. We've seen these promises before. I'll believe it when I see the ships loading in the Gulf.
Well, they also renewed registrations for 400 U.S. beef facilities. That's a lot of reefer loads, Dan. It's about pragmatic stability. They're trying to carve out a space for trade that's insulated from the political friction.
Actually, Jules, it's about de-risking. They are hitting specific numerical targets to avoid broader sanctions. But the real story for me is how Boeing is involved. 200 aircraft in an initial purchase. That's a massive stabilizer for the manufacturing sector.
Look, it's like a prevent defense. They're trying to keep the trade relationship from falling apart while they figure out the long-term rules, right? Between the Ford military pivot and the $17 billion ag commitment, we're seeing a reshoring of priority. We're focusing on the things we actually make and the things we actually grow.
I just hope we have enough drivers left to move it all. Between the deceptive pickups and the robots in Ohio, it's a tough time to be a human behind the wheel.
That's why we do the show, Buck. To remind everyone that there are still humans behind those GPS dots. Whether it's a $17 billion trade deal or a berry shipment to Chicago, it's all about the relationships.
Relationships and data. That's the winning play. That's all for today's High Road. We covered everything from a $580 billion infrastructure bill to the AWS of logistics at Amazon, and finished with a $17 billion commitment from China. Bottom line, the rules are being rewritten in real time.
Goodbye.
Until next time.
See ya.
Keep the shiny side up and your data sharp.